Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Dr. Dick Walker. Most of you know me. I'm from Spokane, Washington. I am an ASEA associate, and I started a series of webinars chatting with, interviewing healthcare professionals of various types. And I know that you may not be a healthcare professional, but you're at least a health advocate or maybe a health influencer. But it's April the 16th, and my guest this morning is Dr. Lee Ostle. So without further ado, Dr. Ostle is a dentist, and he's written several very good books about redox. And so, Lee, instead of me trying to introduce you, why don't you just tell people who you are, and then we'll get into why you're so enthralled with redox and that sort of thing. So.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome again to Dr. Dick's Saturday morning webinar. We focus this a little bit more towards health professionals this morning. So if you're a health professional and joining with us, we appreciate your coming. And I heard somebody say once, we want to be open-minded, but not so open-minded that our brains fall out. But it does require a little bit of open-mindedness to put your brain cells around what this redox thing is. My background is I'm a general dentist that has a strong emphasis in oral systemic health, TMJ and cosmetic and bite rehabilitation. I'm a past president for the American Academy for Oral Systemic Health. In that 10 or 15 years that I spent in that arena around the country, trying to help health professionals kind of get on the same page so that we could better co-manage both oral and systemic health issues. It trained me, I think, very well to be able to look at this redox thing. As Dick mentioned, I'd written several books in that arena, and that was a good training to be able to look at what redox is when it came into my life. The reason why it did come into my life, just as a quick background, is my wife's physician recommended to us that we get her on some redox signaling molecules. This was 3 or 4 years ago, and I remember looking at him and I said, I don't even know what you're talking about. What is that? And he just brushed it off and said, go get some, go Google it, find it, and we'll see what happens. And so we did. I trusted that recommendation, and we put her on some redox signaling molecules. And I describe it as it was like flipping a switch. And for her, it was very dramatic. It was within probably 48 hours, it was dramatically, demonstrably different for her. And that really caught my attention. And with my intense brain, I guess I needed to figure out, well, why did this work? Because I wasn't finding, good answers. And so, again, with my background, I knew how to maneuver through, government databases such as PubMed and research sites quite well. And so I just started culling through and finding basically the primary research. There was a couple of books out there that had already been written, but they were either somewhat esoteric or they were very like a PhD level biochemistry textbook, approach to what is redox biology per se. And so I depended like 90% on PubMed and the literature. And to do that, you can't just pick one study. You've got to pick a preponderance of studies and kind of stitch them together and this is where you're going to see what the leading edge is thinking, because they ground themselves. They always make a proposal in the studies, like we think this is what is true, but they have to ground it on something that's established. And so you stitch that together times 1,000 or 2,000 articles, and you start to get a feeling for where this is going. So with that, under my belt, I had people, mostly health professionals, approaching me, physicians, and asking, if they could have a copy of my bibliography and kind of my research notes. And a couple of them suggested, and I think Dick might have been one of them, but it's like, can we get a copy of that, or can you share that? And it ought to be a book. And one thing led to the next, and that's where the first book, Redox Matters, came from. And it was just my attempt to try and establish, well, what is the science basis for how electrons move, and how does it relate to biology? And then how do you connect those dots to real life, what to health? And Healthy Matters came when I was writing Redox Matters. I knew that there was just too much information to put it all in one book, and I knew there'd be a second follow-on, which would be more about the applying or the application of these principles to a lifestyle. It began to dawn on me that when we talk about prevention, when we speak about how do you not have disease, there has to be rules that you follow, and intuitively we kind of all know what those are. We know what healthy living means, but we're kind of immersed in a culture, both medically, dentally, healthcare, from top to bottom, in a culture that is more about intervention than it is prevention. And we're rewarded for that. We're rewarded on a fee-for-service schedule. We fix problems after they occur, and we give slight, attention or lip service to the whole concept of, can we prevent it? Well, when this starts to hit you, as they say, below the belt personally, it affects your life. You start to pay attention. So, I guess in a capsulized form, that's how I got to this point. I was just intrigued by the science after seeing, what happened to my wife, and realizing that there were some highly respectable and highly respected healthcare professionals in my world, and who I had met, who had already vetted this themselves. And I kind of felt like I was Johnny come lately. It's like, where have I been? How come I haven't heard about this? It's not taught in medical and dental schools or health professional schools. Even some of the more, alternative minded, we call it alternative, from the mainstream viewpoint, but even within the circles of prevention, this isn't well understood, or at least the mechanisms of action for why this works is not well understood. That's for sure. So anyway, that's just a brief, foray into how I got my head poked into this, and as I say, the rest is history. So,
yeah, absolutely. I think it's true for you, as certainly true for me, that much of what I know and teach and try to transfer to other people is stuff I learned outside of medical school. I mean, I went to medical school a long time ago, but even there, and even after spending an extra year at the School of Public Health to learn more about nutrition and prevention, there was still a huge amount of knowledge outside that we didn't know, that we as healthcare professionals didn't know about. And we've got a lot of people in ASEA who are certainly health influencers who don't have that background, but really don't need it to understand what Redox is and how it can help and to recommend it. But I think one of the main points, takeaways from your introduction, is that you looked into Redox not because you got a long dissertation from your wife's healthcare professional about what it would do, but just kind of almost an offhand comment, like, you might want to check out Redox. I've heard that could help. And I know the backstory on that is that your wife's doctor only knew about Redox because his neighbor was a health professional, not in that area, and had mentioned to that doctor that this was an important technology. So it was like word of mouth, and that's how most of us hear about this. But I really enjoyed your first book. I've been a student of Redox for some time. We've talked about that, you and I, back and forth. And you were kind enough to ask me to write a foreword to your second book. And I think the second book, really, I've often said that human beings ought to come with an owner's manual. Like, how does this work? I just bought an electric bike, and my electric bike has a huge owner's manual. And knowing how complex and convoluted the human body works, we need an owner's manual. We're too young at first to appreciate it, but all of us at some point in time, when we're starting to have problems, could use an owner's manual. And that's kind of how I look at Healthy Matters, that second book of yours. But one of the you and I were chatting back and forth and talking, how can we open this conversation with patients if we are a health professional, or even if we're talking to our neighbors. And I think that instead of asking them, are you interested in hearing about redox? I think we should probably first ask them, are they interested in learning about how nutrition impacts their health, or what they could do outside of standard, medical treatments to improve their health. And there you get back to that owner's manual. So explain to me what your major takeaway would be on how to use Healthy Matters, your second book, this one here, because it really is an owner's manual. I think it doesn't just talk about nutrition. It doesn't just talk about redox molecule supplementation. It talks about the whole, how foundational redox is with regards to our health, and how all these things that we talk about, lifestyle things, kind of come together and have an impact there.
So in approaching an answer to that, it's important, I think, that we all, since there's many healthcare professionals, who have been trained in the same medical and dental and healthcare models that, we have been, to give some permission here to think outside the box. There's nothing wrong with being a physician or a healthcare professional who operates and functions at the bottom of the cliff. There's just too many people falling over the edge of the healthcare cliff, every day, every week, and we need ambulances at the bottom to save lives. And so some people get a little frustrated that their doctor isn't, listening to them or tuned into this, but they're doing a great service to humanity by stitching, broken bones and having people recover from heart attacks. That's what you did as an ER doc, was you facilitated that process. But this is the paradigm shift with this is a legitimate, discussion about how do I get up on top of the cliff and put a barrier at the edge of the cliff? How do I get far away from the edge of the cliff to prevent ever falling? And secondarily, how do I help people who've already gone over the edge to climb back up to the top and to do it in the most efficacious way? So it's a permission thing that's like, it's okay. We need to expand and open minds and realize that there's more to this. With regards to the model that we operate in, it doesn't lend itself, to do that easily, because we are in the intervention mindset, and that's healthcare professionals as well as the patients and the people who come see us, because many of them come trained to ask us for a pill. They ask us for an intervention, and they don't really understand how to ask us the question of, what can I do, doc, that will keep me from doing this again? And so there's some education, I think, there. And your question of, well, how do we approach that? One of the ideas I came up with, this was actually a long time ago, and I'm recirculating my attention back to my own what I used to do, but now I have something in hand I can do it better with. Is just a question on my health history form of, are you interested in information about nutrition and prevention? And they check the box or not. And if they do, it certainly is a door opener, because I can say to them, you've checked the box that you're open to receiving information, and you can go from there. The others who don't check the box, and I suppose you could just ask them straight up the questions like, has it ever dawned on you that you could prevent these problems? I get that pills are good and they save your life and keep you walking and going, but are you interested in knowing what the rules of the cell are? And that is the segue, I think, into taking whether it's what I wrote in Healthy Matters or any of a number of other people's approach, to take that and actually implement it in a patient conversation, or even as you mentioned with Dr. Lin, it was over the fence, in the backyard, where his neighbor was retrieving a ball that had gone over the fence, as I understand the story. And they said, "Hey, doc, you might be interested in this." So to open that door and to begin that conversation, I think, is really the important part. And anytime there's a crack in the door, it's a slight opening. A wise man once said, "If you must speak, ask questions." And so just ask some questions. Or is this something that you've thought about? Would you be open to? Would you be interested in? Did you know that these things can be prevented? How bad do you want this to be? How much intervention? I mean, whatever the question is, it opens the door, and then you can begin, with a conversation of, well, here's a video, or here's some printed material, or, let me give you a 30-second elevator, kind of pitch on what prevention even means, or what it could look like in your life. And all that leads to this whole concept of what is a healthy lifestyle. And what I've discovered in both Redox Matters and the research for Healthy Matters is that the cells operate with rules. It's like, would you ever think that it would be possible to violate the law of gravity and to get away with it? This is such a solid, no one questions the rule or the law of gravity. It is a natural law. And we don't even have the conversation about what would life be like if suddenly the gravity switch was flipped and we didn't have it. It would be ultimate chaos. Well, what if the natural law switch was flipped off about how our body works, about how cells work, about all the biochemistry and the biology? You don't have to understand, the transduction of electrons and how they move in a redox fashion from one molecule to the next to understand the concept that they operate by natural law. It's not whimsical. It's not made up every day with a new version. They operate the same way, and they have for eons. So in that context, maybe this is getting a little philosophical, but in that context, if you understood what the rules of the game were and you could play by those rules better, wouldn't you think that you would have a better response? And I get that life happens and we live in a world that doesn't cooperate with that. We have a food supply system that, is not like it was in what we call ancient days, where our bodies were designed, in accordance with that. And we've suddenly, in the last 2 or 3 or 4 decades, we've changed those rules, and we get sick, and we're surprised. We shouldn't be surprised. And so that's kind of maybe a philosophical grounding, but as a healthcare professional, it approaching it that way with that mindset then opens the door to that. And of course, as well as I do that, the medical reimbursement models don't really pay for that. There's not codes necessarily for, extensive education in that regard. And much of that is outsourced, into other arenas. But being aware of it and saying, here's some, I care about you. You're a human being, and these are the rules of your body. You'd never go into surgery and enjoy, finding out that the rules of surgery had changed somehow, since yesterday, because you're not going to, the organs are in a different position. It's like, no, there's really set rules for how this works. And if you violate the rules, there's a consequence. If you obey the rules, then there's a benefit. And it's philosophically, that's the grounding in my view.
Yeah. And understanding that, I think a lot of people don't think about the fact that there's rules for their health. Getting back to the whole idea of some sort of an owner's manual, or at least a discussion with patients about the fact that there are rules that govern how your body works, all the way down to how every cell works. And if you work with them and acknowledge those, and don't try to be a maverick and think that you can contradict them, you're going to stay healthy. And a lot of the people that we see are people who have, like you said, they've already sort of jumped over the fence, fallen off the cliff, and now they need help. But what's amazing is that with the technology that we have now, we can actually still help them by supplementing with redox molecules. But thank you. Maybe elucidate a little bit about what those rules of the cell are, because I think a lot of people, we're used to taking, like you say, a pill for this, a pill for that. And I think a lot of people approach nutritional supplementation that same way. Just tell me what supplement I've got to take. Just tell me, which one. And then they wait every day for something to happen once they start that supplement. And in fact, we know that a lot of things don't work that way. So just kind of, explain those rules briefly and how foundational this redox is. It's not, vitamin C started as a cure for scurvy, right? Well, nobody has scurvy anymore. But we've got something here that's totally different than a vitamin or a mineral. And maybe you can touch a little bit about how foundational redox is when it comes to the rules of the road for cellular health.
Yeah, that's a really great point. The paradigm is certainly shifting, and prevention is very different than intervention. And in that regard, to these rules, we've long held, and many people still think that when you use the word nutrition or good nutrition, I'd say the majority of people will automatically default to thinking about vitamins and what we call phytochemicals, polyphenols, bioflavonoids, just the things you're going to take in a supplement form. And then they would think about, well, I need to have a good diet. It's like, well, what does a good diet mean? Your comment about people wanting a formulaic model to follow, so that they do the same thing with diets. Just tell me what to eat and what not to eat. And so we have all these named diets out there. They're very famous, and many of them are used and abused tremendously. But the nutrition, the model of nutrition is more than just vitamins. It's more than just even phytochemicals. It's about the idea of how our cells burn energy, or how they burn fuel to make energy. And so this metabolism, this combustion, this oxidizing, when we go camping, we build a campfire and we put some wood on the campfire, and the logs burn when there's oxygen present, and that reaction produces energy and some smoke. Well, that's nothing more or less than electrons leaving the wood or the fuel source, which is a reduced source, meaning it has the full load of its electrons. It surrenders those electrons to oxygen, and oxygen takes them away. This is just basic redox, chemistry. And in the process of those electrons moving from the wood to the oxygen, we get this combustion, or this energy that's created. The same thing happens in the cell. Only this time we're not burning wood in the cell. We have glucose, fatty acids, and fats and proteins, amino acids. So we've got 3 macronutrients, we call them, and those are the fuel. We call them the fuel substrates for the mitochondria. And so in the process of making that energy, there are certain things that happen in the body. And the rule is if there's, and this is not a 100%, because every organ can be specific in the fuel source that it prefers. We won't get into those weeds necessarily. But if glucose is present in the bloodstream and it can get into the cell, that's the preferred energy source. We will burn and use glucose first and foremost. And then when glucose is not present for whatever reason, then we will shift, or we will flex to burning fatty acids. And in doing so, that creates ketones. And so this whole idea of the ketosis, or nutritional ketosis, happens. And again, this is just a rule of the cell. If glucose is present, if there's high stores of glycogen, stored glucose, and I'm hormonally balanced, meaning all my digestive hormones are balanced, we're going to burn glucose first. And when that's not there, then I'll get to fatty acids. I'll become fat adapted, or fat burning. And so, and you see this in the real world with all these diets that say this is how you burn fat. This is a fat burning diet, and the whole concept of keto dieting, or ketogenesis, more accurately is called nutritional ketosis, has come about, and it has birthed a tremendous industry. I was just looking at some keto-friendly snacks that one of my coworkers brought in, and we were examining it and saying, this is no more keto-friendly than the man in the moon. And yet it's being marketed as keto-friendly. It's like, well, what does that even mean? and unless you understand the rules of the cell, you won't know how to select your food sources to cooperate with those rules. And so if we start with that basic concept and say, well, if I periodically, intermittently, that's the key. You're not doing this 24/7, 365. It's the idea of being able to be metabolically flexible and to shift from glucose to fatty acids to glucose to fatty acids in a efficient manner. And then you are metabolically flexible. And when you do that, the other rule of the cell kicks in, and that's the rule of hormesis. That's spelled HORMESIS for those listening. You can look that up, and this is basically just a dual phase cellular response that if you have a toxin or a condition in a high quantity, a high dosage, or a high amount, it's going to be an inhibitory or toxic influence on the cell. But that very same thing, activity, dosage, agent, whatever, in a mild, I'll call it the Goldilocks amount, it's just right amount, that is a stimulus that activates cellular health responses, cellular defenses. That's where the antioxidants come in. That's where cellular renewal and autophagy kick in. If you want to activate cellular renewal, if you want to activate the production of your own antioxidants, glutathione, superoxide dismutase, catalase, and a host of others, there is a pathway that has to be activated in order to do that. And the activation for that is not by being in homeostasis or balance. It's by having a low amount of stress in the cell, a very controlled, managed amount. And that's the thrilling part of this, is because that puts it within reach of everybody, because you can manage those and manipulate those circumstances to manipulate the cell the way we want it to be, not the way it's just going to be because we ate. And the point there is, just to bring it together, is if you're eating such that you have high amounts of glucose, or even moderate amounts, is if there's glucose there, that's what you're going to burn, and you won't get out of that carb dependent or carb addicted cellular physiology and you won't be able to activate these pathways. And so what do? Well, you fast, intermittently fast. I call it intermittent fasting. Or periodically you'll do some low carb eating, where you're eating, but you could say you're fasting, but you're not fasting. You're eating fats and proteins such that you're not putting glucose on board or carbs on board. And that produces a nutritional stress periodically such that it activates these pathways. And now you can improve your health and lose weight, and things just, when your cells work right. This is the axiom we follow in ASEA, is if you provide a slight nutritional stress, which is what ASEA is, then you activate these hormetic or these hormesis induced pathways that cause my cells to work properly like they were designed to. That's the thrilling part of prevention, is it's not an accident. It's not a diet. It's not a diet. It is not a diet. It's a lifestyle. It's not I have to eat this food and not that food. And what this does, Dick, is it informs you when you walk into the grocery store. Your decisions are now informed. It's like, I don't want to eat this. I'd rather eat that. I'm speaking categorically. And so it conditions your mind as well as your cells, because you're eating consistent with the rules of your cell, and you're behaving, you're running, the question is, why does exercise, why is that healthy? Why is eating right healthy? Why is having good sleep healthy? Why is stress reduction a healthy thing? Because we agree that they all promote health, but the question is why? How? And the answer is because those activities play on these rules such that it activates these pathways that create the cellular defense that nature designed in our cells to operate when those conditions are met.
And bringing that full circle, where does that tie into a redox supplement, or how do you best explain to people that this really is all about having a healthy redox environment. But as you and I were talking yesterday, we don't want people to think that they always have to be in redox balance, that the secret is really to be getting slightly out of balance, and then the cells manipulating in a natural way their way back to balance, and then overbalancing, and then going back into balance. It's like, I remember somebody explained to me one time that, getting a spaceship to the moon, the spaceship is off course well over 50% of the time, and the mechanisms are to bring it back on target. And I think that's the same way our cells are. We're out of redox balance at least as much of the time that we are, but that's an essential way to keep our cells metabolically in the game and on top of things.
Yeah, the principle is about stress adaptation. If we reduce this down to what we call the redox pathway, we would ask the question, how does a cell know it's in trouble? How does a cell detect that it's under stress? And what does that stress look like? Because that eventually shows up as inflammation and disease. And anytime you have inflammation or disease, you can reverse engineer that back upstream and say, well, before this disease developed, there were some cells that weren't behaving well. And the question should be, well, how did my cells not behave well? What was going on that they didn't respond to these stressors in our life, whether it's poor oxygenation or radiation or toxicity or pesticides or bad fuel choices for our cells, wherever it started. The disease first began because the cell wasn't working properly. It was dysfunctional. And that also happens with aging. It's not that we did anything on purpose. It's just that we're getting older and things wind down in that regard. So, and so the concept of, how do you implement that is understanding those cells, the rules of those cells, and being able to then mind them. And it's more than just a philosophical grounding. This goes back to simply understanding those and saying, if I'm going to prevent those issues from coming, I need to adapt and adopt, a strategy that my cells can be response-able, not just responsible, but response-able. And that's how we're hardwired. And so this idea of balance, I think we do a disservice to the discussion by saying that our primary goal is to always be in balance, to always be in homeostasis with, equal amounts of oxidants and reductants, for example. It's like, well, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with homeostasis, but the way my rules operate is that I want to be able to respond to the stress. And so I have to put it under a little bit of stress. That's the whole point of exercise. It's the whole point of why you don't exercise 24/7, because that's too much. You have to do it intermittently and have periods of rest and recovery in between where you can rebuild and repair the damage that was done by the exercise, and now you're stronger. And so that is that's the hormetic, the hormesis principle of stress adaptation or stress response. And understanding that principle then says, well, it's okay then to do mild stresses. As to ASEA's role in that, this is the magic of what we have our hands on. And in my opinion, we say magic, it's really just physiology, where we found a way to produce the biomolecules, the bioidentical molecules outside of the body, which are natively also made in the mitochondria. We're just the Johnny come lately. We this has been going on for eons because that's how the cells work. The cells naturally make these redox molecules. That's the smoke, the byproducts, the reactive oxygen species that occur from those energy reactions that we talked about, and which is why having proper energy reactions are important. And so we've been making those forever. And so now we have an agent. You can call it a biohack if you want, but it is a mild oxidative stimulus because it has oxidants in it sufficient at a mild enough level. Some people say, well, we need this stronger. If you can make this more concentrated, can you make it stronger? And it's like, that would violate the hormetic principle because too much stress is going to go south on us as well. So this Goldilocks, if there was ever a word that could describe what we're talking about, it's the Goldilocks story. It's the just right amount of oxidation, the mild amount, that is useful to stimulate these transcription factors that activate the gene pathways that promote the translation at the mRNA level inside the cell that produces the response that we're looking for. This is how the autophagy genes get activated, how the antioxidant genes get activated. There's a host of 1,001 molecules and genes that get expressed because of that concept. And it's all chemistry. It's all about, we call them thiol, THIOL. That's a sulfur-containing amino acid. Cysteine specifically, that's associated with these transcription factors that determines the status of the oxidation level in a cell. It detects it. And when it elevates, it does a certain thing. And when it is not there, it doesn't do that certain thing. And that's the switch. That's how we can turn this gene expression on and off now. And mark my words, in the next 2 decades, this is going to be exploited like to the multi-billion-dollar level by big pharma as they discover that they also have the ability pharmaceutically to go in these deep recesses and start flipping these redox switches, very specific ones. And there'll be drugs that will come out of this that will be under physician control that will be targeting very specific genes, but it'll all be based on this concept of the rules of the cell. It's that simple.
And we're at the very beginning of that. And we have a supplement that can non-specifically help the body to flip the switches that are necessary. And the body's really good at as long as you play by the rules, the body's really good at recognizing situations where certain switches need to be flipped and others shouldn't be. And so I agree with you. This is going to eventually get into the drug industry, and that's going to be a whole different animal than what we have. And fortunately, ASEA came first. I mean, we're the only company in the world that manufactures bioidentical redox signaling hormones. And, I just think the sky's the limit of where we can take this and the number of people that can be helped by learning about it. And I think it's important to tell people you don't really have to grasp everything that we're talking about this morning. Right. We're trying to keep it relatively non-technical. Just understand that there is a deep scientific basis to everything that Lee and I are discussing here, and that it has profound influence over your general health and in many cases specific aspects of your health if you've already lost those and have problems with it.
Dick, I think this is a good place to make a disclaimer, because we don't want people to walk away, especially health professionals or even patients, to think that this is a drug.
Right.
That what we're doing is fixing or treating anything. We're not. And, that's the disclaimer, is that ASEA or any redox based thing, at least at this point in the marketplace, is intended to treat or diagnose or cure any disease. That's not what this is about. And I think your comment about the positioning, we are extremely well positioned with this specific product at the foundational level, at the basement level, that people will say, well, will that help with X or Y or Z condition? And it's like, my response often is like, well, I'm not really certain. Is there a cell involved? If there's a cell involved and we can help it, mind its own manners and become better, more functional, then the odds are high that we can help with whatever, the issue is. But we have to also recognize this over the cliff idea. It's like, there's water that's already flowed under the bridge, and you're not 15 years old all over again. It's not, you're already missing some body parts, or, you've had some irreversible damage, and we're not fixing that. This isn't at that level of healthcare. But it's very supportive, and that's why it's not interventive. We're not looking like a drug does for a receptor site to make a change as long as it's on board. We're looking for cellular pathways that we can make function better. And frankly, if the downstream effect of that is that it makes the cell work better, and it undoes or reverses or alters the outcomes that you're now experiencing, that you would otherwise look for a pill for to intervene with, well then, hooray, we celebrate, but we keep on going. And so that's the whole point here, is that this is a lifestyle. It's not a drug. We're fixing the lifestyle, but we're finally able to explain why lifestyle matters. This is why, this is the mechanism. I'm a process engineer at heart. I want to know the mechanism of action. And again, when it dawned on me, it's like, you again got to go back to ask the question, why does exercise and eating right and sleeping right and stress reduction and so on, why are all those healthy? Because we just accept that they do. And it's like, my mind is like, I want to know why. And it's not till you understand this redox concept that it's about reduction oxidation, it's about hormesis, it's about metabolic flexibility, it's about metabolic health. It's not until you do that you get it. And why does this matter? Because 75% of the disease that we experience today is all chronic and metabolic based. It's all metabolic disease. Even obesity, I contend that obesity, I have to be careful how I say this, obesity is not a disease. Obesity is the consequence of a disease. It's about metabolic disease gone right. It's about how your cells aren't using energy properly and storing that energy properly. And if you can fix that, then the outcome would be that you could better manage your weight. And again, it's not the panacea for everybody, because when you're there, you've got metabolic dysfunction, you have metabolic syndrome, you've got metabolic disease, and it's been there for quite a while. Even brain neurodegenerative processes in the brain. It's 10 to 20 years before the first symptom shows up that begins.
Right. Yeah, these are all symptoms of metabolic dysfunction, long-term metabolic dysfunction in most cases.
Yes.
That accumulate over time. And like you said, once you get, when people have weight issues and they struggle and they try one diet or this diet or whatever, and they get temporary, it's because most of those diets that they're doing aren't following the rules of the cell. And I think that, Healthy Matters, I think we can wrap this up by saying, if you've heard something here that intrigues you or something that you would like to know more about so that you can help yourself or patients or friends or family that you're helping to retain their health or regain their health naturally by sticking to the rules of the road and by activating perhaps redox sensitive pathways that haven't been activated sufficiently for years, that you can, there are many lifestyle things that you can do to engage that. And you can also drink the ASEA Redox supplement to assist your body in doing that. And I think we can wrap it up. Lee, do you have any final comments to say? And then I'll let people know where they can find the recording.
Yeah, I think that the one last thing, we've made reference to an agent that we call ASEA Redox. But we also have to give due attention to phytochemicals and their ability to act upon the redox landscape. I'm going to be speaking in Las Vegas next week, as is Dr. Dick here. And this is going to be one of the points I'm going to be making, is that both sides of the redox coin need to be optimally addressed. The concept of hormesis and this gravity idea, that these are just the rules of the cell. That whole concept is about how the cell acts. The cell and our bodies have the ability hardwired into them to act. They're responsive. But nutrition is not responsive. It's an agent. It acts upon the cellular substrate. And so some of those agents that we call phytochemicals, these bioflavonoids, have redox activity because when they are on board, they are capable of being antioxidant. They can help reduce the high levels of stress, number one. And number two, some of them, specific ones, have the ability to act upon these pathways and assist in initiating these redox pathways towards health. And so that gives this the wonderful ability to kind of play both sides of nature's coin here. We're giving what plant-based or exogenous sourced redox support can offer, but we're also enabling the cell itself from within to be more responsive or to act on its own and mind those rules. And so it's really, some of that might be a little philosophical, some people, but it's very well grounded. And I think that's an exciting, distinction to understand here, is that it's the lifestyle. It's how you eat, how you exercise, you move your body, how your brain thinks, and you coordinate that all together with all these assistive technologies, and you're going to have a lifestyle that's better than it was before.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's really the future of ASEA, is to, and you're going to see several new nutritional products coming out, specifically mind, body, and energy. And they take advantage of this concept that there are phytochemicals, there are nutritional components that can actually assist our cells to activate the healthy redox sensitive pathways to do certain things and to really nudge our health in a healthy way in different directions. So I'm excited about that, because I think the sky's the limit there. Huge potential there. So if you like what you hear and you want to pass this on to other folks to listen to, it will be available at redoxmatters.com, which is Lee's site where his books are also available. That's not an advertisement. I just will tell you, if you want to hear this in more detail or want to have the information at your fingertips, these are the best sources that I'm aware of for getting that. And they'll also be on ASEA United and several other places, Vimeo.com. They're pretty easy to find, and I would certainly welcome you using those to help educate people that you're talking to about redox, especially when you're talking to healthcare professionals. So thank you very much for tuning in this morning. I'll be back again the first Saturday of the month to talk about the basic science of redox signaling and how that impacts our health.